The deadliest conflict in human history ended 75 years ago today. In May of 1945, World War II came to an end in Europe. Later that year, President Harry Truman announced Japan's surrender. Formal documents were signed, and September 2nd was declared victory over Japan. This morning, in the middle of a pandemic, local World War II heroes will be honored during a procession down the Strip and a special ceremony at Palm Mortuary. Now, Honor Flight wanted to recognize a group of veterans with a Heroes Ball, but then the coronavirus hit, so they had to come up with this new plan instead, and that procession is set to begin in just a few minutes. We do have a map of the route, and again, in about 15 minutes, that procession will kick off. So this is the map here, starting at the Palm Mortuary on Main Street. Then it will go down the Strip heading south to Las Vegas Boulevard. It'll continue south past Mandalay Bay to Sunset Road and eventually end at Palm Eastern Cemetery in front of the War Memorial. Now we do have a live look from Palm Mortuary on Main Street. That's where veterans and their supporters are gathering right now. And we also have a look from the Strip. Several MGM properties are set to change their marquees and light up for veterans as they pass by. And multiple veterans will participate in today's procession, and we've introduced one of them to you before. Dean Whitaker served in the Air Force during World War II. He became a prisoner of war for 7 months in Germany before he was free. Now we have Sean Delancey live in Chopper 13. Sean's going to be giving us an overhead look of the procession, but Sean, you have a little more information on his backstory.
Yeah, Colleen, it's going to be a very exciting day for all of these veterans on the 75th anniversary of the end of World War II, which marks the end of the largest conflict in human history, the deadliest conflict in human history. Between 70 and 85 million people total died as a result of World War II, and 400,000 of those were Americans fighting overseas for our lives. And this is to honor all of those men and women, and in the age of coronavirus, which is very difficult, of course. Originally, the Hero Flight and a lot of other groups had wanted to do what was called a Heroes Ball, Honors Flight, rather, I should say. We're trying to do a Heroes Ball, and that was not going to work because a lot of these men and women are over 90 years old, not exactly the kind of group that you want together for a long period of time. So here's what they're going to do. Taking a look down at Palm Mortuary right now on Main Street, you can see there's a procession of cars waiting in the parking lot there. They're supposed to take off at around 8:45 from Palm Mortuary here. They're going to head down Main Street all the way down to Las Vegas Boulevard, and then they're going to take the Strip right down Las Vegas Boulevard south, where all of the marquees are going to be lit up in their honor, and they're going to take a slow procession all the way down through there to around Sunset. From there, they're going to take Sunset over to Palm Cemetery, where, well, when they arrive at Palm Cemetery, they are going to have a little ceremony there at the War Memorial at Palm Cemetery over on Eastern, and that's going to be a very a somber, respectful event for these men and women. And you know, it's just so important that we honor them while they're still here, because we've lost a lot of that generation. I know we lost our last Pearl Harbor survivor here recently. And while they're still here, one of the gentlemen that is actually going to be a part of this procession today, Vincent Shank, he is 104 years old, and he's going to be in this procession being honored, and it could be one of the last ones that a lot of these men and women get to take part in. And it's important that not only that we tell them how respected they are, it's also important that we hear from them, and that's part of what we've been doing in preparation for this special here, is just talking with these men and women and hearing their stories, ones that we won't be able to hear when that generation passes, the greatest generation. And throughout the rest of this hour and a half, however long this procession goes, we'll be live throughout the whole thing. We're going to be telling some of their stories, and you're going to be hearing about them live from Chopper 13. But for right now, they haven't started just yet. Again, they're supposed to be taking off out of here at about 8:45, and we'll be following along the entire procession. But for right now, I'm going to go ahead and send it back to you, Kalina.
All right, Sean, thank you so much. I do want to say we actually do have one Pearl Harbor survivor in the state of Nevada. The one that passed away was a Navy veteran who recently passed away, I want to say about 2 weeks ago. But we do have another one here in town, an Army veteran who is still alive. But we have this great segment here on 13 Action News called Veterans Voice, and we get a chance to go ahead and interview and profile veterans across Southern Nevada. So I actually got a chance to speak with the daughter of the Pearl Harbor survivor who had just passed away. We talked about how he left a diary behind for her so she could go through and look through that and just kind of remember how he served and the moments it was like for him when he was over in Pearl Harbor. So we'll have more on that in just a bit, but we do want to introduce you to another World War II veteran who fought to make the world a safer place. He recently celebrated his 97th birthday. So Marvin Davis joined the Army Air Corps in 1941 when he was just 17 years old. Weeks after taking oath, Pearl Harbor was attacked, and Marv was placed on the 49th Fighters Group with orders to Australia. And Marv's history of serving the nation is one of the reasons our community decided to honor him with a special surprise birthday parade back in June.
It makes me feel real humble. I truly believe that every World War II veteran, when they get accolades like I'm getting today, feel very humble.
Oh, I remember that. That was so cute. And although more than 400,000 Americans died fighting during World War II, many, like Marvin and Dean, were fortunate enough to return home and live out the next several decades of their lives. Now, another one of those men was Leonard Nielsen. You can see him here. He was the only Navy Pearl Harbor survivor in the state of Nevada. He recently passed away about 2 weeks ago. He joined the Navy in 1940 and was assigned to the USS Arizona right out of boot camp. Then he transferred to the USS Pensacola. Now, along the way, when he made that transfer, Leonard became sick with appendicitis and was treated on the USS Solace. Now, from this ship, from the USS Solace, he watched the attack on Pearl Harbor happen. He passed away August of this year. He was 98 years old. Now, we spoke with his daughter, who says his military service and experience was a big part of who he was.
There's stories, he said, you go to grab somebody, you think they were there, and you pull out an arm or a leg, and he went through that for days on end.
Now, when I spoke to his daughter, she was so emotional with the fact that he had passed away, but she also just wanted to make sure that people remembered the sacrifice the men and women made to protect our country. And that diary there, that's a diary that he was writing in when he was deployed and when he was serving. And she was telling me and reading to me some of those stories that were in there, just talking about what that day was like when the attack on Pearl Harbor happened. He watched the USS Arizona go down. More than 1,000 people were on that ship, and it was just a terrible, terrible day. We're going to continue now with another veteran who has an infectious laugh that'll really keep you going. Take a look. This local World War II veteran made a huge impact on everyone who knew him. This was Ed Turkin. He was known for a lot of things, but mainly everyone remembered that laugh you just heard. From 1943 to 1946, he was in the Army Air Corps. Now, we caught up with Ed before he passed away earlier this year, and he told us the time he spent fighting in World War II made him the man he is.
I mean, the Army taught me to get up in the morning, make your bed, whether you feel like it or not. In other words, you gotta get up, you gotta get up, you gotta get up in the morning.
Oh my gosh, I remember this story. Leah Pizzetti did this story for us when she worked here for our Veterans Voice segment. And I believe I was here with Ross, and we were just crying during this story because it was just so cute. Now, Ed Turkin was diagnosed with COVID-19 earlier this year. Unfortunately, he lost his battle to the virus in April. Ed was 96 years old. Now, even though we're in the middle of the pandemic, groups who honor veterans will try their best to show their respects and keep veterans safe during today's events. We have another look at the procession route. Again, that is starting off, and I want to say now about the next 5 minutes or so. It'll start off at Palm Mortuary on Main Street at about 8:45. It'll then head down the strip and end at Palm Eastern Cemetery in front of the War Memorial. We do have another look right now from Palm Mortuary on Main Street, where veterans and their supporters, you can see here, are gathering before they take off. This is again all thanks to Honor Flight. That's the organization that's putting all of this together. I believe we do have Sean Delancey and Chopper 13 overhead right now. You might be able to give us a better look at what's going on from the air from this specific area. Sean, can you hear me? I think we're still trying to get in touch with Sean right now overhead, but you can see the activity there and how many cars are out there as well. So again, thank you so much for joining us here as we continue our coverage. Like we mentioned before, marquees across the Strip are set to change their marquees here to honor the veterans today. So we do have a live look here from the Strip. Where that should be taking place shortly. I'm not quite sure if we can see some of those changes yet, but they are planning to change some of those marquees along the Strip to honor the veterans. This is just amazing that we're able to have a procession right now in the middle of the pandemic and make sure that all of these veterans are safe but get honored the right way, so we never, ever can forget the sacrifices that they made. We do have Sean Delancey now in Chopper 13 giving us a look right now overhead at Palm Mortuary. Sean, what do you see? What are you seeing up there?
Yeah, so over here, over above Palm Mortuary from Chopper 13, we are seeing the procession begin to, or continue rather, to line up here. We're starting to get a better look at some of the vehicles that are lining up here. I've seen a Henderson Fire Department fire truck towards the front of the procession. Looks like Las Vegas Fire and Rescue is also down in there. And then we've got several branded vehicles. And we know that one of the people that are taking part in the procession today is an old car club. And correct me if I'm wrong here, but it does appear that there is an older Cadillac in the middle of the procession, as well as a couple of other branded cars. People that are involved in this is the Honor Flight. We've got Spotlight Senior Services and Humana that were all putting all of this together. And it does look like towards the back there's some branded vehicles. I can't exactly figure out what they are, but we do know that there are...
All right, unfortunately, I think we lost Sean Delancey's chopper signal for us, but you can see that everyone is starting to gather there again to honor our veterans for the 75th anniversary today, marking the 75th anniversary of the end of World War II. Now, one of the organizations that made today's event possible is Honor Flight Southern Nevada. The group is known for gathering veterans who fought in several different historic wars and taking them on a once-in-a-lifetime trip to Washington, D.C. Now, once they get there, they tour the memorials that have been put up in their honor. And last year, 13 Action News got to tag along with one of those trips. Reporter Leah Pizzetti shows you how the heroes spent their weekend.
It was an emotional weekend in D.C. with lots of little surprises sprinkled throughout, from a police escort around the city to that massive welcome home today. One of those surprises happened on the flight home today.
Attention, please.
An airplane full of tired veterans.
Mr. Gene Albright.
All with honorable pasts.
He was a dispatcher, a tank mechanic, a sharpshooter, and he also served in Germany.
They're physically and emotionally exhausted from touring 7 war memorials in Washington, D.C. in one day, but the roller coaster isn't done yet.
Many of these men served during a time where there was no email, there were no texting. They hardly ever heard from home. But when they did, they had a mail call.
On the flight home, hand-delivered letters.
This is from my nephew Rick. He's a policeman.
From family.
Lord Ross. He's one of our twin grandsons.
From strangers.
I am a Cub Scout.
All with the same theme.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for being a positive influence in my life.
Some bringing out laughs.
Yeah, there's a dinosaur.
Some bring out love.
I also feel very lucky to be able to call you my friend. Sincerely, Carol Lusky. Isn't that a nice letter?
Others.
You served with pride, bravery, and courage. You are truly amazing. Thank you for making the sacrifices you did for all the Americans.
An impactful ending to a well-deserved trip.
On a scale of 100, it's 110. And that's with love, emotions, and meeting beautiful, wonderful people.
These 25 Southern Nevada veterans making bonds and memories that will last the rest of their lives. Leah Pizzetti, 13 Action News.
All right, we want to get back up to Sean Delancey joining us live right now from Chopper 13. Sean, more and more people are gathering. Can you give us a better perspective of what you're seeing, how many cars you're seeing show up, and kind of give us a breakdown on what people can expect today?
Yeah, Clean, absolutely. Sorry for the technical difficulties there, but you never can trust technology when you are doing live television. Let's take a look right down at Palm Mortuary once again, where, Clean, you're right. People are continuing to line up here. We're seeing more and more cars line up in the parking lot, and maybe just before I cut out there, I had guessed that there was a Cadillac lined up in there because there's an old car club that is taking part in the procession today. And hearing word from our photographer down on the ground, cram into this parking lot right now between the Henderson Fire Department, Las Vegas Fire and Rescue, this old car club. We've got a bunch of sponsored cars down there. It looks like Subaru sponsored vehicles. And if we take a look out at the front of the procession, it does look like they are pulling right out onto Main Street at the moment. From here, they will be heading south to Las Vegas Boulevard, and they will be taking Las Vegas Boulevard all the way down past the Mandalay Bay to Sunset. And there's going to be marquees that are lit up in honor of all of these World War II veterans all along the way. It's going to be a slow procession, so that's going to be something that you're going to have to avoid traffic-wise. But it's going to be a slow procession as they head all the way down there to Sunset. They're going to take a left onto Sunset and head all the way over to Palm Cemetery. So we are just getting started here. Everybody is pulling out. It looks like they have gone fast at first, and now they are trying to line up right there along Main Street and taking it slow. We have several veterans that are taking a part in this. One that we talked to before all of this was a guy named Dean Whitaker. We've caught up with him a couple times. He is 94 years old right now. Served in the Air Force between 1943 and 1945. When I was talking with him, he said that he flew 20 flights over Germany, or Europe rather, in a B-17 bomber. And every single time he would come back from one of those missions, they would have to find new holes to plug in the planes because the German gunfire was relentless from the ground. And then they were on one final bombing run where they were trying to take out some oil fields that were supplying the German war force, and they were shot down. He said that there were 10 men on on that current flight, and he was one of 2 that survived to make it home. He was a POW for 7 months, and he says that he loves to take part in events like this to, you know, of course, receive a little recognition. He says he likes to be recognized for his veteran service. He always appreciates it, but when he does stuff like this, he really does it to honor the men that didn't make it home. And as I said earlier, there were about 400,000 people, men and women, are American soldiers who did not make it home from the conflict in World War II, and that is both in the European and Pacific theaters. And of course, this procession is to mark the 75th anniversary of the signing of peace deals between U.S. forces and the Japanese government, officially ending World War II. Of course, that predicated by the dropping of 2 nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki to finally end the war. And let's go ahead and take a look further down Main Street here towards the front of the procession. It looks like they're getting close to the junction of Main Street and the 515/95 all the way up that direction. So they're heading towards downtown and the back of the procession is starting to catch up at this point. And you can see some of it has been cut off by a little bit of traffic crossing what I believe is Washington there. But this will be crossing all the way through town. They expect it is going to take about an hour to make it from Palm Mortuary up north here in the downtown area down to Palm Cemetery on Eastern. And what's really cool about this is that it was almost a last-minute decision, if you will, by the guys over at Honor Flight, and they do a great job at Honor Flight trying to make sure that our veterans, especially those from World War II or those with terminal illnesses, get to fly out to Washington, D.C. and visit the monuments that were built for them. They serve particularly World War II, Vietnam, and Korean War veterans, and take them on those. But they were planning, before all of this, to mark the 75th anniversary of the end of World War II, to do what they called a Heroes Ball. And that, in the age of a pandemic, is just not possible. Again, the men and women that they're trying to honor here are all over the age of 90, one of which is 104 years old, and that is not the population that you want all in one place at one time. So they had to pivot and decided to do this car procession down Las Vegas Boulevard and Main Street instead. Along here throughout the live portion of this procession, I'm just going to be hitting on a couple of the veterans as we go along that are actually going to be honored at a ceremony down at Palm Cemetery at the War Memorial down there. We'll bring that to you live as well. But I want to get to the man that I just mentioned a moment ago. His name is Vincent Shank. He is 104 years old. He was a Navy pilot between 1941 and 1945. He flew on a B-17 bomber as well, same as William Dean Whitaker that we just talked about. He was a bombardier, and he flew 13 in Africa and went on bombing raids up in northern Italy and Europe, and of course Italy and Axis power at that point. But he flew 32 missions, and then he was shot down in Italy and ended up serving 2 years as a POW. And during that time, very interesting nugget here, the Pope had sent a bunch of instruments to the POW camp that Mr. Shank was stationed in currently. And they said that a lot of the soldiers, to pass the time, picked up those instruments, and the main procession now passing right beside the Circa Resort, what will soon be the Circa Resort, and the plaza right here along Main Street. But they said they would form bands and play music to try and keep spirits high while they were spending so much time as prisoners of war in Europe. And Mr. Shank ended up playing the bugle. He would play the taps every single morning and every single night to try and keep his fellow soldiers' spirits up until they could finally return home. And a lot of people didn't, but he was lucky enough to be one of them to be home, and he is on this procession today. Not sure exactly where everybody is placed in this procession from front to back, but we do know there is a handful of World War II veterans all over the age of 90 on this procession honoring the 75th anniversary of the end of the greatest conflict in human history. And you know, these veterans served in both the European and Pacific theaters, but this honors the end of the Pacific theater. Germany surrendered in May of 1945, and it was still months later that Japan and the Japanese forces refused to surrender. And it took the dropping of 2 nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki to finally get the Japanese soldiers. World War II both began and ended in the Japanese theater, in the Pacific theater. Of course, began with Pearl Harbor, the loss of thousands of lives in the surprise attack, where Japan, in the early morning hours of Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, went on a bombing run trying to eliminate the United States Pacific Fleet in that surprise attack. And one of the main reasons that historians say that the United States was allowed to launch into the war as quickly as they did was that most of the fleet was out of the harbor at that time, and the Japanese didn't know that. And so that saved a lot of lives and saved a lot of the Pacific fleet. And then it took island hopping was the strategy that they called it, to take each individual island in the South Pacific, one after the other after the other. Iconic battles, and holding that much territory obviously was not easy. And so, and it appears that I'm getting some sound in my ear right now that I'm not sure. Passing below us right now, and it seems to be stretching over several blocks at this point. The southern block seems to be getting close to Las Vegas Boulevard, and the northern block is still around the Circa Resort. The northern end of the procession is still up towards the Circa Resort, and this one isn't being blocked off by police officers, things along those lines, so cross traffic is still flowing through. So if you have a chance to get out to Las Vegas Boulevard and see this in action, then there's a good chance that you can hang out for somewhere along 20 minutes to see the front to the back of this procession. And I want to talk a little bit about the honor flight that put all this together, because they really do great work. Here in the honor flight of Southern Nevada, they have flown around 451 veterans to Washington, D.C. to take them on a tour of all of the monuments that respect the sacrifices that they made in theaters around the world, from Vietnam to Korea to World War II. Right now, they are making World War II veterans and those with terminal illnesses the priority, obviously because of age and wanting to make sure that they get that kind of respect that they deserve. Here in Southern Nevada, they've taken those 15 flights to get 451 veterans out to Washington, D.C. to honor them. And they are an all-volunteer group, so it's completely free to the veterans for them to do this. And they have these guardians that will fly along with them, these volunteers that pay their own way, just to make sure that the veterans have the best experience possible. A lot of them are veterans, younger veterans, who can make sure that the less than able veterans are able to get around and be happy on their journey. It looks like the main bulk of the procession is turning onto one of the thin areas of Main Street now, right but down there by the Arts District. And they're moving along just east of the Clark County Government Center. But actually, as a personal side, my grandfather was a World War II veteran, and one of the last trips that my mom got to take with him from Welch, West Virginia, was an honor flight. And Noah Mahaffey is his name. I know him as Pawpaw, but he got to take a flight, and it was the first time he'd ever been on a commercial flight at the age of 88 years old. First time he'd ever been in a commercial flight. The only other flights he had taken were in the military at that point, but he was a Navy man, a mechanic in the Atlantic. He was in the European theater. Never saw combat, but he did tour post-war Europe as a Navy mechanic, trying to get everybody back on track in Europe during a lot of the rebuilding of Europe at that point. And one of the main goals of the Allied forces at that point was to rebuild even the Axis forces to try and make powers, if you will, that it led to the rise of fascism, authoritarianism, and the aggression of the Nazi Party. So they tried to rebuild Europe, and that was part of what Pawpaw did after the war was over, while he was still enlisted in the military. And he got his chance to go and see the memorials that were built for people like him that went over and sacrificed everything during World War II. And that's the people that put this procession together, going north down from, or going south rather, from Main Street over to Las Vegas Boulevard. And it really was a heavy toll that all of these people had paid, whether they survived and came back, the horrors that a lot of these people saw, or the ones that sacrificed everything and were not allowed to come back and see their family.